Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Tando Lamula, and I'm joining you from Durban, South Africa, and I am the moderator for today's digital dialogue. For the benefit of participants who are blind or have a visual impairment, all speakers will begin with a short self-description, starting with me. I am a Black woman. I have brown skin. I have brown braids tied to the back. I'm wearing a black shirt. I have on gold earrings and red lipstick. Digital Dialogue is a series of panel discussions exploring civil society perspectives on the emerging digital world. Today, we build on the insights from our previous digital dialogue. You might remember the one we had on the impact of shifting geopolitics on the digital space. And we're taking a deeper dive into one of the most pressing consequences of that, which is the financial sustainability of digital initiatives. One of the first strategic moves in the alliance between right-wing political forces and big tech has been the financial strangulation of digital rights organizations and independent digital initiatives. This has led to funding restrictions, financial blacklisting, and corporate consolidation, affecting the ability of digital advocacy groups to operate effectively. As the geopolitical battle over digital governance intensifies, so does the need for alternative sustainable funding models that ensure financial independence, resilience, and long-term impact. We have an excellent panel lined up today, and I'm delighted to welcome Abdel Ghani Al-Hassani from Tech for Peace in Iraq, Natasha Felizi, who is a co-consultant of the Brazilian Fund for Journalism, Nina Weingrel, who's also a co-consultant for the Brazilian Fund for Journalism, as well as Louise Elvis, Partnerships Coordinator at RNW Media in the Netherlands. The extended bios will be dropped into the chat after each speaker has provided their opening input. To start us off today, each panelist will introduce themselves and frame the issue by sharing the current landscape and their key points for around 5 minutes. And then we'll have some time for discussions and questions. Please don't forget to post your questions in the chat, and we'll get to them later in this session. Abdel Ghani, would you please turn on your camera and join me on the screen? Would you also please start by introducing yourself? Tell us a bit more about Tech for Peace, the impact of the USAID cuts, and your response. Please remember to start with a very brief self-description.
Thank you very much, and hello everyone. Thank you for the opportunity to be here, and I'm looking forward for a fruitful discussion about this important topic. My name is Abdel Ghani Al-Hassani. I'm an Iraqi from Belgium, and I'm 40 years old with dark hair, and I'm currently speaking from my office in Erbil, north of Iraq. And I'm representing Technology Organization for Peace, which is a leading independent media and digital rights organization. Since 2016, we have been working in fact-checking, media literacy and digital rights advocacy across Iraq and MENA region. Our mission is simple but essential. We are combating myths and disinformation in the region, promoting digital literacy and enhanced digital security for local communities. Actually, this is happening in a region where access to credible information can literally shape the political stability and public safety. And we saw many cases like this before. And Tech for Peace is a signatory of IFCN, International Fact-Checking Network, which is the only international body that's governed the fact-checking around the world. And also we are a trusted partner with Meta, TikTok, and Google, which means we have direct access to these companies, and we have some resources we can use to in our work from these companies. However, a few months ago, and it started actually from last year, the USAID reduced and finally now cutting their funding, which almost made up around 80% of our operating budget. we noticed an immediate consequences, and it was severe. We had to cut back the staff salaries, reduce the number of fact checkers, which actually reduce our ability to counter this misinformation campaign in timely manner. So, and then we have to also stop some of our programs, like digital and security programs. That's actually leaving the community more vulnerable to online rumors and cyber risk. We also had to relocate to smaller office immediately to reduce our costs. I think the most important matter that we are talking about here is the threat to editorial independence. Many of the independent media and NGOs actually need this kind of funding to keep independent, and that will definitely reduce ability and others' ability to counter misinformation at scale, especially in a country like Iraq, when we see disinformation is really sophisticated and politically weaponized and to be used in different scenarios, in elections, and among political parties. So this is a very serious issue. It's like happening now when the funding is actually zero side. We tried different scenarios. We see that the EU funding could be an alternative. We have tried to apply, for example, to European Endowment and Democracy funding. However, the mechanism of the funding in general in Europe is very heavily bureaucratic. Long application process, which can take months and year actually sometimes, strict documentation requirements, and financial support always been delayed for different operational reasons. We have tried also to find some alternatives, like, for example, corporate sponsorship, advertisement partnership, paid fact-checking and digital security services for companies and others. We are still looking forward to see the result of this, and would love to discuss with the panelists and with the audience about any possible scenarios. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Abdul Ghani. You can switch off your camera. And I'd like to welcome Natasha to please join me on the screen. Hello, Natasha. Would you please switch on your camera, unmute yourself? Please start with a brief self-description, and then please provide us with your starting inputs.
All right. Good afternoon, everyone. It's still morning in Brazil. I'm Natasha. I'm a white woman, long blonde hair. I was surfing, so I look kind of messy. Together with Nina Vaingrill, who is also here, I'm one of the consultants who helped launch the Brazilian Journalism Fund. So we're here to talk about this experience. Very briefly, for the past 10 years, we've seen in Brazil an expansion in the field of independent journalism. So there was a big growth in the number of organizations working with digital journalism, non-digital also, but mostly digital. We've seen the creation of an association of digital media, which is also a sign of the development of this field. But we've also observed financial fragility and dependence, financial dependence on external resources. So on the one hand, we have a burgeoning, very exciting community of independent media. On the other hand, we have this fragility, and that is connected to the shift in the business model of journalism, to the scarcity of available funds for journalism and media. So we have numbers that IFPIM provided when they did their feasibility study to launch like the International Fund for Public Interest Media, that only 0.2% of international development aid resources go to media, and the part that goes directly to organizations is only 0.05%. So it's very little money coming directly to media organizations. The other part of the money is going to infrastructure and other things. So there is a lot of scarcity. It became even worse after USA cuts affected organizations and programs that help to sustain the activity of this ecosystem. So philanthropy has played a very important role in helping media and this ecosystem to survive, but it's a very important ally. But resources, okay. So philanthropy has been a very important ally, but the resources it offers is very limited too, in the amount, in the size, and in the means it has to distribute these resources. So before launching the Brazilian fund, we conducted a survey with the field, and our findings say that one of the problems with philanthropy money for journalism and media is the regional and profile-based concentration of resources. So in Brazil, we have a lot of concentration in the Southeast region. You have a very limited number of donors working with media organizations, and practically a non-existent local philanthropy working with media. So dependence on external philanthropy is really, really serious. And there is a predominant investment model that is project-based rather than based on institutional support. And most of the organizations we surveyed, they pointed out the project-based funding as one of the main problems because it doesn't let them invest in their own sustainability. I'll pass it on and then we can follow up in the conversation. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Natasha. You can switch off your camera, and I'd like to welcome Nina to join me on the screen. Hello, Nina. Please unmute yourself, switch on your camera, and please begin with a brief self-description, and then please provide your starting inputs.
Thank you, Tando. So hello, everyone. My name is Nina Weingrill. I'm a white woman with brown hair, long brown hair, wearing a black shirt and glasses. I am joining from São Paulo, Brazil. I'm a journalist and researcher working in the intersection of journalism, civic media, and public policy. I have been engaged in strengthening local journalism for over 18 years now. And most recently, I co-led with Natasha the process of designing the Journalism Brazilian Fund. I just want to bring a few informations to add to this conversation. Brazil is home for to more than 14,000 newsrooms. Most of these newsrooms are underfunded, understaffed, and regionally excluded from financial investment. So the reality here is in terms of funding, even before USAID and all this recent changes, was always difficult and extremely unequal. In the survey that Natasha mentioned, we also found out that 68% of the newsrooms we sourced operated with teams of just from 1 to 5 people, reflecting the precarity of the sector. 60% responded that their annual budgets were under $100,000 a year, and almost 30% said they had no revenue at all to operate, so a lot of volunteer work. Also, as Natasha pointed out, half of the philanthropy money that we sourced in the last 2 years went just to 9 organizations working for journalism here in Brazil. The rest, nearly 90% of newsrooms that received the money only average about $30,000 a year to operate. So it's not just unequal, it's also a regional problem. The southeast of Brazil gets almost 80% of all the funding, while has a lot of the media, about half of the media, but that's also a lot of asymmetric distribution of money. And north, northeast, and midwest parts of the country that are home to almost 40% of the population are left behind of these investments. These are the same regions that are facing the worst climate crisis, the worst threats to democracy. So why this all matters in practice? Most newsrooms can't pay their teams. They can't invest in safety procedures. They can't plan ahead, and they survive on very short-term project grants and not core funding, which is often shaping the editorial agenda and leaving them more vulnerable, especially in hostile political climates that we have been facing here in Brazil recently. So with all of that information, we were able to design the Brazilian Journalism Fund to address some of these structural changes and gaps. But this is, we know it's not the only solution, right? We would need for the whole landscape, the whole ecosystem, about $420 million a year to support. And the fund, as of today, has only about 0.6% of that. So the real change, we understand, require a lot of public policy and other actors supporting media and journalism. But we believe the fund is a start because it provides multi-year core funding focused on local realities, helping to decentralize some of these resources and also uplift excluded voices from the conversation. So more than a grant maker, is a solution that wants to become a model that can inspire other efforts across Global South to treat journalism as a public infrastructure, not just charity. So I'll pass on to the discussion so we can talk a little bit about that next. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Nina. It's interesting and great to see that as bad as it is, it's not all doom and gloom. There are solutions that I think will be unpacked later in this discussion today. I'd like to welcome Louise to please join me on the screen. Please unmute yourself, switch on your camera, begin with a brief self-description, and please let us into your key talking points.
Thank you so much. Thank you for the invitation for being here. Hi, I'm Louise. I'm a light-skinned Brazilian woman with shoulder-length black curly hair and brown eyes. I'm wearing a green top and some big earrings. So I work as a partnerships manager for R&W Media, but I've worked in the past as well for a re-grant organization fundraising for funds and also for a foundation in the past. Now I work for R&W Media, and we are an international media development organization, and we support independent digital media in more restrictive settings. We do capacity building, research, and we co-create digital media solutions with our partners. And our main pillars are strengthening the media viability of organizations and also promoting an ecosystem of information integrity. So I wanted to start my talking points to zoom in a little bit on the European landscape. And although I'm also from Brazil, I've been working and living in Europe for quite a bit of time now. And we've experienced, especially here in the Netherlands and previously also in the UK. So what we have at the moment in the landscape in Europe, many governments are cutting the development aid budgets, inspired also in the US aid cuts that were done by Trump. So in the Netherlands, we are seeing now a cut of almost €1 billion of development aid, and also a cut from the public broadcasters. And the same is happening in the UK with the BBC and in Italy with RAI as well, with license fees being changed and the investment being cut for public interest media. With the European Union, we're also seeing some big cuts of like almost 40 million in the Creative Europe program. And although now they also have added journalism to their portfolio, adding 16 million euros is not, it's still a modest increase compared to the cuts they had before. And we cannot forget as well the big hole that OSF left in the field. They fired 80% of their staff in Berlin and 60% in Brussels. So this is a gap that's really hard to fill. And although it sounds very scary, I really think that we have to learn how to move forward, intellectualizing these budget cuts and try to find ways to move forwards and beat the system somehow. What we're calling now a crisis in Europe has been the modus operandi in a lot of other countries with restrictive settings. We are still in a place of privilege when you see the ways we used to fundraise before. We had trusted governments that used to put millions into the CSOs in some countries in Europe. And some organizations didn't have to diversify their portfolios of funders because they had such trust in government, for example. And this is changing. As I said, here in the Netherlands, we're seeing this money being cut severely, and them forcing as well the organizations to diversify their fundings. And it's time for us to look also to the global south to kind of learn how to be more adaptable, resourceful, and to survive under pressure, and to look for them not just for solidarity, but for lessons of resilience. And yes, to understand journalism, not as Nina said, not just charity, but as like a critical infrastructure for democratic participation, basically. So I think there are three ways that we can think about moving forward, and kind of shifts that come from both, like from the funders, from the CSOs, and both. The first one would be shifting to funding more ecosystems rather than innovations, because I think when we speak about digital, there's still a lot of funding that goes into funding specific tools or the deployment of specific tools, but not the ecosystem. You know, there's still a critical work of building digital literacy, civic awareness, community trust, safety, storytelling practices that's extremely underfunded. The other thing is that big tech, when they give funding, it's still to promote their tools and their data models, their own infrastructure. So we cannot compete with big tech if we're only using their tools as well. So when we look at this intersection, we have to think of who is building the tools and who decides how they're used, and how are we preparing people to navigate the digital spaces in a safe way, critically, and regardless of the platform that is trending currently. The second way forward would be to break the silos and funding across intersections, for us to find funders that are, sometimes not the funders that are the unlike allies that maybe you think they're not going to fund you, but to convince different people funding into other topics to come into your work. For example, you can convince a climate funder to support your investigative journalism piece, for example. And to really break the silos, and you cannot think of digital without thinking of the intersectionality in it, and like all the other topics that you can work with. And sometimes the budgets and funding are very separated with different buckets. Journalism, media, democracy sometimes sit in different places, but we really have to see this as a holistic space. So we have to think of like ways to do cross-sector funding pools. And we've been doing this a bit in RNW Media because we've been combining digital innovation with civic engagement, also storytelling, and how we can shift narratives and influence social norms. And we've been working with digital media in climate, but also in SRHR, in gender, in migration, etc. And third, last as well, it's rethinking the funding models and using more creativity and a radical collaboration, because the traditional grant making model is really not built for this moment. It's very slow, it's very competitive. There are very little organizations now, especially in Europe, doing the work that it's good, and everyone's going for them. It's risk adverse. Some funders would like to fund the same projects together because they know that they can be more impactful and long lasting. They prefer organizations that already have co-funding. And sometimes also this model can be extractive. So we have to think of, blended models, trying to play with different creative ways to move forward, even like private investments, public fundraising, crowdfunding, ways to generate revenue, you know, how to sell your own tools and services. And there's even now a trend on impact investing as well, which is not a grant, but a money that you get as a seed to develop your business model. So yeah, we need to think of radical collaboration because we cannot, there's no room for competition. We all do different things and the pot of money is small, but if we collaborate and if we share the resources and the infrastructure to survive those cuts, that's the way forward. You know, if an organization that has a research department and the other one has a training department and they want to do work together, that's how they can collaborate, like joining the forces and the different expertises to access those fundings together. So yeah, I think those are my observations. So there's no space for competition and we have to move forward with radical collaboration. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Louise. And I'm seeing a lot of activity in the chat box. We're going to get into that after this next session. Right now, I'd like to invite all the panelists back onto the screen, Abdel, Nina, Natasha, and Louise. We're going to give you the proverbial floor to ask each other questions based on your key inputs for about 15 minutes or so.
Yeah, I may start here. So thank you very much for this great discussion. I have just one comment or question or suggestion, and maybe Luis, if you have any information about that. As I highlighted, and actually other panels also, the bureaucratic that's inherent in the EU funding mechanism. And I saw a solution that used by USAID a few years ago, where they were channeling funding through international implementer partner, so one partner, to local and regional organizations. And that partner will not be directly involved in the project. They will just govern the funding. They will do the monitoring and evaluation. They will support the local and regional organization. And with this approach would actually leverage a pre-approved thematic project. So for example, digital rights, digital security, misinformation, mis and disinformation combating. So this kind of pre-approved, and then they will, the partner will identify capable local and regional implementing partner. And by this, they reduced the need to extensive institutional approval and streamline compliance and enhance the response time. So this could be an idea. I'm not sure if there is anything similar in Europe, but that was implemented on a larger scale by USAID 5 years available, pre-approved thematic funds. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Abdelghani. Yeah, definitely, for sure. I think this is a good idea, and it's aligned with what I said about sharing infrastructure, because there are a lot of organizations in the global north that have the capacity to deal with the bureaucracy and the people, but are not grassroots organizations that cannot deliver the project. So that's how they can collaborate to, you know, take the burden out of the grassroots organizations, let them do the work, and actually, and there's a lot of lobbying as well. It's not just writing the proposal. There's a lot of lobbying that you have to do with EU, with the ministries, with the foundations. A lot of the things that I mentioned as well is things that sometimes fundraisers have to educate the funders about, you know, and vice versa. Like, it's a conversation that you have with funders. So I think this is a good example of how we could collaborate, and then no organization is obsolete in the ecosystem. Like, we all have a role to play, and then we can all split the cake. You know, it's still possible.
Thank you.
I have a follow-up. I'm sorry, Tando, I don't know if you have another question, but I would have a follow-up question for Louise in that same perspective, because something that concerned us while building the fund here in Brazil was to think about the role and often the superposition of journalism support organizations that sometimes receive a lot of the resources and constrain that resources that should be getting into the ecosystem and to media. I wanted to understand a little bit about your takes on this. How do you see the role of journalism support organizations in Europe, but in general, and how do you build a resilient ecosystem? Because we understand that there is a need for them to exist, but how do you balance and understand, you know, everyone has a role? I mean, I wanted to understand a little bit your take on that and how that is being discussed in Europe.
Yeah, for sure. I came back now from the International Journalism Festival in Perugia, and there was a session all on that had very, very opposing views, and I don't think we agreed. But at the end of the day, like, all types of organizations are needed. Yeah, it's intermediary, but you know, there are things that you know, the outlets themselves cannot do alone, which is like a strategy ecosystem work that requires you to be working from a, you know, with different organizations, understanding the whole landscape, and also the work to sometimes lift the burden of, you know, writing the proposals and, you know, lobbying with the funders and doing the advocacy, that sometimes people are more worried about, you know, getting the stories out there, and we take that part of the work. So there isn't really an answer to that. I think there's a space for everyone. And I think this is a question as well for the funds, right? Because the funds also end up being intermediary between the foundations, and but yeah, that's also a question I had for you, actually. But yeah, but at the end of the day, I think having the funds are great too, because the foundations don't have that visibility on the ground of how to disperse that money. And, you know, making a $1 grant and making a 1 million grant require the same amount of work, the same amount of due diligence. So that's why, you know, the work of the funds are so important on the national level too. So I think there is space for everyone, at least right now. There's work that we can share, and we can use the privilege of power of some organizations to do the lobbying, to do the strategy work, all based on local inputs, of course.
Hi, Louise. I would like to comment on that. When we were designing the Brazilian fund, I think this is one of the more important questions we were asking ourselves, me, Nina, and all the people who were involved. How to build a fund that would actually be a piece of infrastructure to make resources more accessible and not less accessible. So I think sometimes when we criticize intermediaries, we are talking about power imbalances between global north and global south, and the way the money arrives in the field, so in the developing world or in the global south. For example, we saw a lot of discussions about how intermediaries are always funding capacity building and capacity building programs and giving small grants and giving just a little bit of money and concentrating a lot of the strategy and not sharing this to be co-constructed with the field. So we had this in mind when building the fund, and one of the things is the commitment to make money get there, like get to the end. And I think this is something that we cannot miss as time goes on. Like, the fund can never become an organization that does most of the work that organizations should be doing. And this is always a risk, because for some reason there is always this tendency. And this is something we are really aware of. So when we surveyed everybody, this is also something that came up. And I think there is a big difference between you creating like programs that a fund operates or that an intermediary operates, and like just dripping resources and giving like little work and little resources to your partners, or really committing to giving resources to your partner and having numbers for that. and committing that the strategy on how to use that money will also be co-built between all the grantees and all the participants. It's a big challenge.
Yeah, I think co-creation is at the core of this. I was wondering, how was that for the development of the fund as well? Like, did you, besides the survey, like, do you have do you involve communities or journalists like in the selection? Like, how does that work in the structure of the fund? I'm not sure if that's too off topic, but I'm interested.
Yeah, well, I think this is like discussing mechanisms. We are talking about the Brazilian fund right now, but I think we are getting inspiration from a lot of interesting models we've seen in different contexts. And I think sharing this among like global south partners can be useful, because we've seen a lot of initiatives trying to do the same thing, trying to build collaboration and trying to create infrastructure that will address like the gaps that is affecting everybody. So yeah, working with ad hoc committees in order not to concentrate like the decision power always in the same hands is something we put in the design of our fund. Having an advisory board, also overseeing the work of the executive team, not having the board making decisions about grantees, so distributing the decision power among different actors and making sure like different actors participate in each part of this decision-making process. I'm curious to hear from Abdal if what we've been discussing about these funds resonates with something you're doing there.
Yeah, thank you very much. So I think, I mean, I'm talking about more local context here. So we saw that the funder and most of our funds actually, most of our projects also, the donors would like to see collaboration between different implementers or different partners in the work. So it's not like implementer beneficiary type of work. They want the project to co-create it by different, for example, NGOs or participants, and then you create this kind of, we call it alliances, and that's actually proved to have more impact than when individual organization is implementing the projects on the ground. And for example, we used to do a lot of capacity building for NGOs, for young people, for different influencers, social media influencers. So if it's like a training model, capacity building model, there will be training. They will use the knowledge they have somehow. But then what we did is that we created this kind of community where we keep in touch with these trainees. Most of them start working with our organization on volunteer base. The others, we implemented campaigns together. They still feel connected. So I have, like, for example, one group who we worked with 3 years ago. They are still active on daily basis on that group, on the community we created. They identify mis and disinformation. They are really playing an important role in dissemination the correct information. When we do the work, when we do the articles, they will disseminate it, and it's much better than if we are alone doing that. So I think that's also reflected on several donors, especially USAID was really pushing to see this kind of collaboration. This is in terms of Iraq, but also they were really want to see regional collaboration, because I have one solid example, like in Iraq, we had the internet shutdown, for example, one day. And then it seems like and whatever reason for it, there is like an internet shutdown for few hours in Iraq. But then regionally, if you monitor the region, you would see the same internet shutdown happen in Lebanon and in Syria at the same time. So that's mean there is much bigger agenda here. So this kind of collaboration is also needed to really understand the context regionally and not just focus on one implementer or one country. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I would like us to get on to the third part of our digital dialogue, which is questions from the audience. I'd like to believe if there's anything else, it will come up here. We do have quite a bit of engagement. I'll start with a question from Philemon. This one is for Natasha. Who is funding the media fund mainly, local or external donors?
Yeah, this is another big challenge because the Brazilian Fund for Journalism was created after 5 philanthropies and 5 international philanthropies came together and started discussing with the ecosystem about the gaps and what was happening in the field. So from the philanthropy side, there was a challenge to be able to discuss and to engage in dialogues with the many journalism organizations that would come to them to ask for resources. So they accepted to join the fund initiative also to solve their problem. Because this was an articulation that came from the ecosystem somehow, but also came from the necessity of philanthropies acting, international philanthropies acting locally in Brazil and perceiving that they had a giant demand from this very complex field and they were not able to address it properly. So the fund came as a solution from both sides. So they agreed there was a need for a better mechanism to distribute resources, to be closer to the field, etc. But there is also a risk in that because this is dependence on their agendas. So we have these 5 big philanthropies, and some of them, like OSF, who agreed to join the fund in the beginning. As time went by, they changed their strategy and everything that you are well aware of what happened with OSF. And we can't be sure they will commit for the next cycle. So this is a pilot that was funded. We got funding for 3 years of a pilot, but then we are not sure if you're going to be able to keep the dialogue with the funders who engaged in this initiative in the beginning. So yeah, it's being funded by IFPIM, by Oak Foundation, OSF, Luminate. What's the fifth?
Ford.
Nina, I don't know. Ford Foundation. Yeah. So we are struggling to get national donors to join the fund also. And this is extremely challenging in Brazil as it is everywhere else that is not Europe or the United States.
Thank you so much. So creative collaboration is a solution, but it does have its limits. Perhaps Natasha or Nina, because this question will seem like a follow-up to this first one. This one is from Tala. Tala says, what is the process to access private sector and philanthropy donations? We see with the Guardian and the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation that the organization's corrupt practices in the global south, agribusiness, is overlooked.
I can try, and then if anyone else has thoughts on that. We believe, as we said in the beginning, when we started to research for the fund, what we saw when we had access to the data was a lot of overlap in terms of who was accessing philanthropy money in Brazil. What were the media? So there was a very big concentration. So we had 9 organizations receiving half of the money donated. That's a lot of the money donated to 9 organizations out of 100 that received money during 22 and 23. So there is a scarcity in terms of resources, but also an asymmetry in terms of investments. And these organizations that were receiving money were organizations that were operating for a longer period. They knew a lot of the ecosystems. They were very important actors. So we understood that if we were designing a new mechanism, it should be able to distribute this money more equally into the journalism field in Brazil. So we believe that mechanisms such as the fund, but not only the fund, can operate in driving resources more equally if we work being transparent, because for us to access that information, it wasn't open in the website. We had to ask for each philanthropist, who were they donating to. We built this huge forum to analyze the data. So this is not something that is out in the open. And I believe that mechanisms such as the fund can be actors that try to bring transparency into the way that the money is going and flowing to news organizations. So we see that that's a way to, as you say here, Tala, to fight and expose corrupt practices in such funding mechanisms. But also to open more the conversations so other actors can talk about how they want to access the money, how they want to use that money, what for they want to use that money. So this is something that during the process of designing, we try to source with important actors in the ecosystems and design the mechanism in those terms. So one of the pillars of the fund is to have annual reports on how this money is being distributed in Brazilian journalism every year. So this is a way of accountability, right? Because we understand that there is always a risk of becoming something that perpetuates these types of relationships and concentration of resources. So I guess there is not one way to do it, but we believe that being transparent about the work that the fund is doing, why is it giving money to these organizations, is a way to expose or to fight against these practices that concentrates the resources.
Thank you so much, Nina. We have another question from Tabani. This is, in light of growing financial gatekeeping, what strategies or alternative funding models have you found most viable in ensuring independence and sustainability for digital rights or advocacy work? I think this has been touched on a bit. The second question is, what role can cross-sector or international alliances play in countering the financial consolidation we are seeing? And how can civil society organizations position themselves to benefit from these collaborations without compromising their values? I don't know if we can hear from Abdal a bit on these questions.
Yeah, so I think, technology organization for peace are now exploring the corporate sponsorship. So this needs a lot of work, especially with the kind of work that we are doing. So we need to find and align it with their social, with their CSR of these companies. But then that's actually a possible scenario where, especially the big telecommunication company or internet providers, they have some kind of CSR money that's are ready to be deployed for the community. And then the other things is the paid services. Like in our case, we saw an increasing demand for such services, especially fact checking. For example, there were, and of course, digital security. For example, for banks, we saw in Iraq, like there were a lot of mis and disinformation around banks, and it's related to political issues. So this also could be a possible scenario. However, we don't know if it's viable or not. We are trying now. And regarding the second question, I think the cross-sector alliances is critical. Like, for example, we engage with universities, tech firms, international NGOs. That will lead to share resources, as the panel mentioned before, and co-create solutions. So we can benefit of these if we can do this kind of alignment, actually. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Abdul. Saad from the World Bank says the majority of digital platforms that he has worked on, collaborated on, have had short lifespans. Has this been anyone's experience on the panel? Is there an explanation for the short longevity of digital projects? And do you consider scalability by governments as part of the solution?
I can try to answer that one, but I think someone else mentioned about how the granting to this space sometimes is very short term and project based, and I think that really doesn't help. And sometimes, you know, the agenda is set by the funder to develop a certain digital project, and that doesn't go ahead because maybe it doesn't fit like with the actual impact that the organization is trying to create. So that's like an assumption of like why this happens. As I said, I saw that there's a lot of like different calls from big tech to deploy certain tools or to follow a certain methodology, and you really have to develop something to fit that call. That not necessarily is something that you were aiming to do as an organization, but you know, because you're searching for funding, you keep trying to fit into these boxes to find the money, and that doesn't happen just with the big tech money, but also with foundations, with any funder. You always have to try to fit your strategy into the different boxes they're trying to create. And that links back to what we're talking about, the cross-sector collaboration. Like if we don't make it broad, like all those things are related, right? Like journalism, you know, the digital space, the informational integrity. You cannot look at one thing and not look at the other. We have to have a more holistic view of that. Maybe if that's the case, then the digital projects can last a bit longer. And yeah, having a more ecosystem view of the funding landscape.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Louise. I'm going to squeeze this last one in. We can try and keep the answer to under 2 minutes. Kimani from Tribeless Youth says we have slower adaptation in countries like Kenya and access issues as well. How do countries like ours catch up and avoid being left behind?
Yeah, so I can try with this one. So I think regional partnership and knowledge sharing networks can be the solution to fill this gap. However, international funders also have responsibility to support this locally driven solution rather than imposing one size fit model, which we saw in different donors. So I think, yeah, the trying to build a grassroots digital movements, international and regional networks can help actually. Thank you.
Thank you. Antonia Alliance 2015 says, how do we square digital advance with justice, but also with the huge energy resource cost it represents?
Yeah, so I think it's a concern, the energy cost, and however, with this lack of resources, I think our hand is tied. But what we can try to do is to emphasize on partnership with companies that using greener digital infrastructure. Let's say, like there's something called, I think, a green hosting, which is more energy efficient digital infrastructure. So, I mean, we can emphasize on this, but.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you to all our speakers, Abdelghani, Nina, Natasha, and Louise, for a wonderful and insightful discussion, as well as our sign language interpreters and captioner. I wish we had more time because this conversation just seems like it could go on forever. Thank you all for joining today and for your engagement. All our dialogues are available as for on-demand viewing on the digital dialogue section of the center's website. Thank you so much.